Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lawcast. This time, we're covering something that's not a WrestleMania. Cewsh, how weird did that feel?
Every year we do this thing where we spend 2 months just talking about WrestleMania. And not just WrestleMania, but chronological WrestleMania. And it's so weird to peel back and unwind my brain and go back to doing like random shows from throughout history after that. Which is why it seems like every year our first show coming out of WrestleMania season is this weird old WCW palate cleanser show you pick.
Yeah, we just had to do something totally different. And from the grandeur of WrestleMania, we're going something much smaller. It's pre-WCW pre-Hulk Hogan WCW, Spring Stampede 1994. A WCW pay-per-view that stands out to me is just something very interesting and different, and sort of what the company would have been if Hogan hadn't come in, both for good and for bad.
That's the really interesting thing is that when Hulk Hogan came in, he basically, like a black hole, disrupted every storyline, character, progression, everything that was happening in the company. It became all about Hulk Hogan. Every character became about what is my relationship to Hulk Hogan. It destroyed everything
Yeah.
for the better.
Plus, they changed the creative team. Kevin Sullivan takes over the book. Hogan brings in a bunch of like his guys with him. Beefcake comes in. Jim Duggan comes in. Like they really load up on former WWF talent. Like they do an overhaul. Steve Austin's push evaporates. Some other guys suddenly get depushed because Hogan's not a fan. So they do really kind of upend their roster.
And while the show is having a bit of a mini renaissance at this point, they're putting on a lot better shows than they had in the early 90s.
Oh God. Yeah.
You can still see that like a lot of this is getting kind of old. Like they haven't really made a bunch of new stars yet. Like this still isn't a product that's on the rise necessarily. It's just a lot better than it was before.
Yeah. So this is a year into Eric Bischoff's run. I think he took over as executive producer in April 1993. And I think it is fair to say the company has grown a lot from like the Jim Herd, Bill Watts years.
Oh god, it's just so much more pleasant to look at.
Yeah.
So many of the times when you're like, "Hey, let's go do a 1993 Great American Bash," I'm like, "Oh, cool! I get to look at a dimly lit like bingo hall for a little while." This looks great, like a professional setup. The set looks good, the ring looks good, everyone looks great. They have music that doesn't suck, and you can actually hear it. Like it's a big step up from where they were before.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Bischoff was in charge of initially. Like he was not in charge of the company as a whole. He was really just in charge of like the television presentation. Like not even really the creative, but just what does the show look like? And it's improved so dramatically. Yeah, they've got new lights. It's bright, it's colorful, it's clean. Like yeah, everything about this looks 1,000 times better than it did when Bill Watts was running the show. Like Bill Watts was intentionally trying to make the show ugly. Like he was trying to make the show look like Mid-South wrestling in the 1980s, which was not a product that was ready for national TV in like 1993.
And I don't know how much direct control Bischoff had over this, but the wrestlers themselves also look better. They just like there's just more star power and charisma on the roster now than there was in the early 90s. There was such a dereliction of stars early on in the 90s as they're just trying to wind their way out of all the 50-year-old dudes from the 80s still making money and the 19-year-olds who aren't ready yet. Some of those 19-year-olds are finally ready and they're making it look good.
Yeah. So on top of the company, both in front of the camera and behind it, is Ric Flair. He's both the world champion and the booker. Not exactly a coincidence that those two things are true at the same time.
Funny how that works. And he's wrestling his favorite person to wrestle. Not necessarily the person who most deserves a title shot.
Yeah. Flair has taken over the book in the last few months from Dusty Rhodes. He won the world title from Vader at Starrcade in an absolutely classic match. This is the
Stunning.
Starrcade we got to cover sometime. It was just perfect presentation. Like Flair comes basically out of retirement to wrestle Vader in Charlotte and puts his career on the line and beats him. And it's just a very like Rocky style build that's all about like Flair getting back into shape and like getting his confidence back and beating the monster to win the title. And this was 100% an audible. The main event of Starrcade was going to be Vader versus Sid, and then Sid got fired after the fight with Arn Anderson in England, where he stabbed him with the scissors.
And while that match would have been fine, and you know that we would have personally loved it, this audible was incredible. Literally, it revives Ric Flair's career completely. I'm sure that he wasn't done in the ring forever or anything like that, but like this is such an amazing. This prolongs his career 10 years just by happening, and just by how incredibly successful it was.
Yeah. But the biggest story in wrestling is that they've reached their deal with Hulk Hogan, and he's coming in. Really not a secret because they're just open. Like Flair is at this point openly doing promos on Hogan on TV. Like if they didn't get him, they would have looked pretty stupid, but they landed him.
Yep.
They've been teasing he might show up. They're literally just like Hulk Hogan. Ric Flair has invited Hulk Hogan to Spring Stampede. We'll see if he shows up. Spoiler: he does not.
He does not. And Bobby Heenan cannot get enough about saying that on this show. Where is he? I don't see him in the crowd. Is he in the front row?
But yeah, the changes are coming. I mean, just again, credit to Eric Bischoff for getting WCW to a point where they could sign Hulk Hogan. Because like 2 years before this, Hogan would not have even considered going to WCW.
God, no. Like what? There was nothing there. Like he wants to wrestle in a dimly lit auditorium when he could be wrestling for WWE. Like, no. Especially at this point, like, he doesn't need wrestling at this point. He's got other things going on. Maybe his movie career isn't popping off the way he necessarily wanted it to be. Maybe Thunder in Paradise is basically Knight Rider with a boat isn't necessarily what he thought he'd be doing.
No, but he can do that and do, the occasional tour of Japan where he makes big money.
Yeah, he doesn't need to worry about... He's Hulk Hogan. He's the only household name other than maybe Andre, in the history of professional wrestling at this point. He does not need to worry about coming back to wrestling. He risks a lot by agreeing to this deal, by potentially sullying his legacy with a lesser promotion, which is why it takes them so long, and why it's so fucking impressive that Bischoff pulls it off.
So Flair beat Vader in a steel cage match at Super Brawl to retain the title. The Big Boss Man was the special referee for that, and he helped fend off interference from Harley Race, which set up a feud with Vader for this show.
What did you think of Harley Race's Vader's bodyguard, or manager, or whatever it is you want to call him?
I liked it just because, I don't know, gave him a little more, gave him somebody to talk for him, which... Vader is a good promo, but I think a beast is usually best when they talk less. So I thought it was a good presentation overall.
This is probably just because of how much we've had it drummed into our heads more recently. But I just feel like they had Paul Heyman on the roster, and like that's who should have been managing Vader.
I think they only have Heyman because they're doing the working agreement with WCW with ECW at this point.
I don't so much mean now. I just mean when Vader kind of originally.
Oh, yeah, before this. Yeah, I mean, so that is kind of the next bullet point. Well, the next bullet point down is Flair, after he's done with Vader, is looking for his next opponent, and he settles in on one of his best friends and greatest opponents, which is Ricky Steamboat. Was there a ton of reason for Ricky Steamboat to get a world title shot in 1994? No, but they knew it would be a good match.
And I think it's one of those things where, like, Flair didn't really anticipate himself being the world champion. He didn't necessarily have a whole lot of ready, baked-in opponents for himself.
No, they were planning on Sid being the champion, and like Sid is looking for a different kind of opponent than Flair is.
So now they're like, well, fuck, we got to reshuffle. What's going to work automatically? Steamboat. Steamboat's right there.
Hits.
We'll have a classic match, no problem.
Yeah. And it's in Chicago where Steamboat beat Flair for the world title in '89. Like, a lot of history they can play into.
Yeah, even though, and I'm going to say this without trying to be mean, this is not the Ricky Steamboat who won the title in Chicago in '92. Like, this is a different Ricky Steamboat.
I mean, neither guy is who they were 5 years before this. They're both getting old, but, like, they deliver. It's an excellent match.
Absolutely.
So they've struck a working agreement with ECW, which I find fascinating because, like, if you were thinking about things Eric Bischoff would like, it seems like ECW would be at the very bottom of the list, but I don't really know. I've never really heard the story of how that came together.
I could never figure out if it's because he was like, oh, look at this up and coming promotion. Maybe we can raid them for talent later. Let's go ahead and do this. Or if it's really just that he was just trying to keep all of his options open. I've never been able to tell. It's certainly not something he did out of benevolence.
No, although he does show, I mean, as we see, the year after this, he does, or this year, I think, is when they do when he puts on the AAA pay-per-view, the When Worlds Collide.
Yeah. But I think that all of that is part of something Bischoff's talked about, but honestly hasn't talked about as much as you would think, is like his grand vision for WCW is that they would bring in all the best wrestlers from all over the world and just turn it into a super promotion.
Yeah.
That's not
unite
really
everybody against the WWF.
Yeah, that's not completely what happens, because what he wants is actually to steal the best wrestlers from all the other promotions. And he can't do that, so instead he has to make a bunch of political partnerships.
But yeah, I mean, we've seen, Cactus Jack has gone to ECW and worked his matches with Sabu and gotten heat for spitting on his tag belt. Kevin Sullivan has done some shots in ECW. I'm trying to think of who do they get from ECW in this talent trade. I can't, off the top of my head, name anybody who actually comes over.
Well, when does Sabu start working for them?
That's after this. That's 95.
Okay, so that doesn't come until further
and that
down
was
the
like
pipe.
they tried to sign him. That wasn't a talent exchange.
Oh yeah, I know.
This doesn't last long after this. I think this is pretty much it for it. But this show has a lot of ECW elements on it. There's a lot of hardcore on this show.
And I wonder whose idea that was, because I don't know if maybe that's something that appealed to Bischoff at the time and he kind of ran away from it later.
Because now he's very much like the I hate gimmick matches type of guy.
But I think he was just looking for anything that felt new. Like he was just, because this is right when he starts to like sort of dip his toes into creative a little bit, and just like enough that he's like, can we just try something different at all, please? That's not just old men wrestling NWA style. Anything else?
Yeah, and works out well on this show. One other thing of note is Bobby Heenan has come over early in the year. He's there to replace Jesse Ventura, who is on his way out now that Hogan is coming. Ventura is on this show, but he's only doing the backstage interviews. It's Heenan on the color commentary.
And Bobby Heenan is a beautiful breath of mountain air compared to everything else we've ever heard from this promotion.
Heenan would explain his decision to go to WCW pretty simply. He had needed neck surgery for years at this point, but he couldn't afford it because he didn't have health insurance. In WCW, they made him a Turner employee, so he would actually have health insurance and could afford to get his neck fixed. And also, his daughter was in Alabama going to college, and that's an easy drive from Atlanta, so he could go visit her.
I mean, it's pretty cut and dry, and I mean,
they gave him a nice raise from what Vince was paying him.
And they were kind of already starting to phase Gorilla out, so I think Bobby saw that the writing was on the wall for him too.
It was a weird fit in the WWF by that point.
It just didn't feel the same. Like Bobby and Vince on commentary was not something that was ever going to work long term.
No. So to get into this show, it's Sunday, April 17th, 1994. We're at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, Illinois. Also something to kind of highlight how their stature's improved. They're running the Rosemont Horizon instead of the UIC Pavilion, that was historically where they had run when they would come to Chicago. The WWF's building was Rosemont. The United Center is about to open, and the WWF runs SummerSlam there that summer, so that might be part of the reason Rosemont is welcoming WCW here.
And that's an important consideration, because we've talked before, I think, a little bit about how WWE basically locks down buildings in each city. Yeah. So, like, WCW always ran the smaller building in each town because WWE would be like, hey, we won't bring our business back if you let them in. So to be able to run the Rosemont, which is, even though the United Center's bigger, Rosemont's a better venue. It just is a good get for them.
Yeah, no, big improvement from running the pavilion, and in the years to come, we'll start to see them take some of the A buildings. Like they get the Palace of Auburn Hills, they get. I'm trying to think of what the other ones are, where they kind of outduel the WWF for the better building. But
They got the
this is,
MCI Center in
yeah,
DC.
yeah, MGM Grand in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
There's about 12,000 in attendance. 9,000 are paid for a $125,000 gate, which are huge numbers for WCW at this point. Like $100,000 gate is incredible for them.
It's just so funny because we spent so many weeks now talking about WrestleMania buy rates that to hear a $125,000 gate is just like, what, for like 10 people? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about, WrestleMania did an $8 million gate, but yeah, I mean, this is WCW in 1994. Like, their house shows are doing like, sometimes like $10,000 at the gate.
Yeah, as they used to say back in the day, it's just winos and bored people out there.
Yeah. They do 115,000 buys, which is pretty much just like the tip. That was just kind of their pay-per-view audience at this point, was they would do like 100 or 115 or 20,000 each show.
Yeah.
So when Hogan comes in and they do 250,000, you can see what a value add he is.
Yes, no question about that.
Yeah, like people ripped on them for the money they paid Hogan, but like he paid for himself with that very first pay-per-view, as we talked about when we did that Bash at the Beach 1994.
Yeah.
On commentary, Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan, which is a fairly new team for WCW at this point, but like kind of the voices of WCW I think of for this era, and into the late 90s.
Yeah, I'm used to having like a third voice there with him too, but
yeah,
like
usually Dream or Tenay or somebody.
And they haven't really gotten that chemistry down where like eventually we get to the point where like Heenan would just bust Shivani's balls and Shivani would just pretend like Heenan wasn't there for the entire show in a really humorous way. They haven't gotten that down yet, but they'll eventually get to the point where they're a really good legendary team together.
So in the dark match, there's two dark matches. One is a very strange one. Danny Bonaducci from the Partridge Family defeats Christopher Knight, who is Peter from the Brady Bunch.
Real quick, let me just peel back the fourth wall for a second for you guys, because there was another show that we were considering doing here instead,
yeah,
which was TNA Lockdown 2009. Is that right? And that also somehow had a Danny Bonaducci dark match. That show was so boring and sucked so bad, we just plain decided not to do it. Instead, we're doing this one, which also, coincidentally, has a fucking Dan and Bonaducci match. Like, these are like 11 years apart. What a weird coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah. As weird as to say, I don't know why that wasn't on TV. Like,
like,
not that those are the hugest celebrities, but like, I don't know, it's only 1994. Like, the Brady Bunch isn't that long ago at this point.
I have to wonder that since his other match also was a dark match, maybe because he was a syndicated radio personality already by this point, and a pretty big one too. Like, they may not have wanted him to be on air, so to speak. Like, sometimes a lot of celebrities did that, where they'd only be like on the non-televised part. I'm not really sure. It was a weird decision for sure.
Yeah. And then the other dark match, Kevin Sullivan and Evad Sullivan defeated Pat Tanaka and Haito, Paul Diamond. That would be the Orient Express from the WWF.
Yeah.
Shame we missed that one.
Shame we missed it.
Not a lot of frills to the opening package, and we kind of just go straight into the ring. It's Johnny B. Bad versus Diamond Dallas Page is our opening match, which feels like the opening match on every WCW pay-per-view for about 3 years in here.
Yeah, it really does. And it's not a bad thing.
No.
It's a good thing. No, I'm sorry. I had to do that.
but like two very like strong and entertaining characters.
And let me say this. Diamond Dallas Page obviously is someone that we regard so much incredibly better at this point, looking back in
Yeah.
retrospect, right? DDP becomes a megastar. Johnny B. Bad does not.
No.
But
Although,
if you
like,
look at
look at
if you
where
look
they
at
are
them
here.
Johnny B. Bad's a star.
Oh, Try to Be Bad is I mean, it's always been strange to me how good Mark Miro was as Johnny B. Bad and like how bad he was as Mark Miro. Like he knew how to play this Johnny B. Bad character and like he knew how to work a match around this character. But yeah, as soon as he left and had to be Mark Miro, he was clueless.
See, that's the fascinating thing. Not only does he have probably the best body on this entire show, but he's so full of charisma and life, and he's so deep into the gimmick, which is this flamboyant little Richard ripoff.
Yeah,
And
perfect opening, perfect character for an opening match.
yeah, that shouldn't work, but somehow it does.
Yeah.
And he's so goddamn athletic in the ring, it's ridiculous.
And then, like, okay, Diamond Dallas Page, I don't know, trying a little hard here.
Diamond Dallas Page is in the middle of his 55 gimmicks period, where he's like smoking a cigar and he's got jangly diamond glasses and his outfit is like 55 singlets at the same time, and he's got Kimberly down there and she's the diamond doll, and he comes out to the ring here and he gives Bobby Heenan a little diamond brooch or some crap just to like bribe Bobby Heenan. I don't know if we're supposed to be of the opinion that he's like super incredibly wealthy or that he just likes diamonds. None of this is functional as a character at all. This is so like, fuck, I just graduated wrestling school and I'm trying to figure out who I am.
It's so strange that only a couple years after this, he's going to be one of the most over baby faces in wrestling.
It doesn't make sense. And that's what people would constantly say is they tried to convince him not to become a professional wrestler because it's like, dude, by the time you get good, it's going to be too late. It takes 5 years. You don't have 5 years.
And he was already 35 or whatever at this point.
And like, the magical thing about DDP is it doesn't take him 5 to 10 years. It takes him 2 to 3.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And he was relentless about as a worker. Like, he wouldn't stop. And that was the brilliant part of it.
Yeah.
And he was 38 here.
38 already. I mean, he's been around a couple years at this point. I think he first starts wrestling in like 92 or 93. But yeah, like 38 years old and like, yeah, guys who are 30, and especially this is the era of like dirt sheet writers burying like anybody who's over 35 for being too old. And he's 38 and he's just breaking in.
That's nuts.
This is a pretty basic 5-minute match. Bad gets the pin with the Tutti Frutti followed by a sunset flip.
And like this sunset flip is, look, there aren't a lot of super athletic people in WCW at this point. Like, it's just not a thing that's in the business right now. But like, he gets on the top rope and does one of those like leap over the guy into a sunset flip, and he leaps like 10 feet in the fucking air.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm Vince McMahon, people have made fun of Vince for years about throwing money at Mark Miro because he wanted Johnny B. Bad. But if you're Vince McMahon and you're watching this, just say you're watching this show, you're like, you would immediately be like, yep, that's the guy. That's the guy I want.
You get the WWF marketing machine behind a guy who looks like that and is that athletic, you should think it would be a home run.
Like, that could be your next top guy. Like, he's got that kind of look and personality. It's nuts. It's not Vince's fault that turned out not to be his actual personality.
Yeah. Then we go backstage where Mean Gene, well, actually out on the ramp, Mean Gene interviews Jesse Ventura, who teases he's got big scoops on the hotline. I think this is right after he's won his case against the WWF.
Yes, because they make Mean Gene says something about like, hey, you got that $1 million smile right now.
You look like $1 million.
Can we just for a moment talk about Jesse Ventura's hair?
Where he's shaved his head, but he still has a ponytail.
Steve, he has a completely bald head.
Yeah.
But jutting out of the middle of his neck is one long, thin rat tail that extends all the way to the middle of his back. And I've never seen anything like that before.
I love Jesse Ventura. He was awful in WCW.
He just didn't care.
He didn't care, and he didn't fit, and like especially the amazing thing is, if you ask me who's your favorite play-by-play guy, I'd say Jim Ross. If you ask me who's your favorite color guy, I'd say Jesse Ventura. They team up in WCW, and it sucks. They're terrible together. So they just have zero chemistry, and like Ross has never worked with somebody like Ventura, and like isn't willing to put him over.
It's one of those things where I think if you paired up later Jim Ross, who kind of learns the entertainment side of it,
Yeah.
he could have definitely worked with Jesse. It's just this Jim Ross is all fucking business. He's not here for shenanigans of any sort. And Jesse is here just to crack jokes.
Yeah.
Like, that's his style. He's not here to do anything else. Yeah. He doesn't know the wrestlers. He doesn't care to learn. They gave him a huge bag of money just to do nothing. It's not the ideal circumstance. It's like when you pay a football player in their contract year a shitload of money, and the next year they just get fat and don't do anything. It's like, whatever, I got my money, we're done.
Next up, we've got a TV title match as Steven Regal defends against Brian Pillman. Definitely an interesting mix of styles, but I thought this is the very typical TV title match. So it's Regal is your heel defending champion. This has the 15-minute time limit for a TV title defense, and pretty much from go, Regal is just trying to run the clock out. Like, he does everything in slow motion. He's taking his time. He has no interest in trying to beat Pillman. He just wants to run the 15 minutes and keep the title.
I feel like this is the only promotion and the only time in history where draws became such an acceptable way for a match to end that it wasn't even weird. Like, I swear, like 92% of all TV title matches end in time limit draw.
Oh yeah,
that's just how it worked. Yeah. So like, there was no, I didn't think anything else other than that was going to happen. Though, as you talk about the match, the ending to this match is fucking stupid, and we can talk about that. But the other thing I wanted to point out too is I always kind of thought as Brian Pillman as being kind of a big guy. I know he was like did light heavyweight stuff a little bit, but he just always seemed big in my head. Next to Regal, he is a fucking cruiserweight.
Regal's a bigger guy than I think people kind of think of him as. Like, one, he's tall. Like, I think he's like 6'3", and he's thick. Like, he's a stocky, heavy guy.
And this is when he's jacked too. Like, like young, just came from England wrestling people for money. Regal was outrageously jacked.
Regal spends almost the entire 15 minutes working on Pillman's back. Pillman starts to make his comeback, but his back keeps giving out. Announcer calls 1 minute left in the match. Regal comes off the top rope, and Pillman catches him with a drop kick. Pillman then hits a suplex as time runs out. They didn't time that right.
No, the timing is all off. Like, the announcers are actually yelling at Pillman like, hey, there's only a minute left. The ref should be telling you this. Get the fucking match going.
Yeah, not a hit. I usually enjoy the TV title, but this one didn't really work.
I would go so far as to say that every finish to every match on this show is bad and wrong. But, I mean, we'll get more to that grand thesis as we go. But, like, I never got comfortable with the time limit draw thing. It could be very effective, like when they're tearing the house down and you're begging for more, and you come to the draw and it's like, man, fuck, I can't wait to watch these two wrestle again and get a definitive in. That's cool, because there was like some Dustin Rhodes versus Austin matches, some like Steamboat matches. There were times where it worked, but if it's not a match that's tearing the house down, it just feels like a waste of 15 minutes.
Backstage, Mean Gene interviews Colonel Robert Parker and Bunkhouse Buck about Buck's match against Dustin Rhodes tonight, which will, of course, be a bunkhouse match.
Steve, to the uninitiated among us, what is a bunkhouse match? What's a bunkhouse?
Something with cowboys, I guess. What's a bunkhouse match? Just a no disqualification match with a funny name.
Yeah, I mean, it was like...
You wear jeans and you whip each other with belts are usually the kind of definitive features of it.
This is the Dusty Rhodes signature match. Like, they play up that, like, Dusty never lost a bunkhouse match.
Oh. We know
because
he won the Bunkhouse Stampede every year.
he was booking, and he would book himself to win every bunkhouse match.
Next up, we've got a Chicago street fight for the tag team titles as the Nasty Boys take on Cactus Jack and Max Payne. I may have said this was for the tag titles, but it's actually not. The Nasties are the tag champions, but the belts aren't on the line here. Chicago street fight means no disqualifications, falls count anywhere. Foley is coming right off having lost his ear in the match against Vader in Germany a few weeks before this.
This is such a legendary time for Mick Foley. He's so brutally unhappy during this period, and he desperately wants out. And yet everything that he does in this 6-month stretch basically sets the tone for his entire career after.
Yeah.
It's like this horribly depressed period winds up making him one of the biggest stars in the business.
Yeah, I mean this match, and then the next pay-per-view, it's him and Sullivan against the Nasty Boys, and they beat them for the tag titles. These are just some brutal, brutal matches.
Just this whole period, and that's the thing too. If we're saying that Eric Bischoff did not like hardcore matches or whatever, clearly he saw something in Mick. Because Mick's being allowed to do some stuff in these matches that no one's ever gotten to do on WCW.
I think there's also just there's no control over anything in WCW. They just let guys go have their matches.
I guess you're probably right. Though you would think that there would be more pressure from the Turner types to not allow this kind of stuff to happen. He's not getting spikes poked in his eye or whatever, but still it's not awesome.
Yeah. He's been working in ECW as part of the talent exchange, which kind of paves the way for the rest of his career. But he's having the feud with Sabu. I think they've had their barbed wire match. He got a lot of heat because after he lost to Sabu, he did a promo where he threw the WCW tag title down and spat on it. I think that happens a little bit after this, but some notable things, but his departure from WCW is imminent at this point. He's not interested in sticking around for what this company is.
Yeah, and you can't blame him. If he doesn't go to ECW, his career probably ends in 1996, because Hogan is damn sure not sharing a roster with anybody like this at this point in his career. He's damn sure not having a match with him.
Love the thought of Hogan versus Cactus Jack.
Mid-90s Hulk Hogan in a brutal hardcore match would be so interesting. Because the match that Cactus Jack gets out of Sting is one of the most interesting Sting matches ever.
Yeah.
Just forcing him to play against type opens up a new dimension to that character. It's awesome.
This is just a brutal, brutal match. This isn't a shoot. But this isn't a work either. This is a cooperative fight.
This is the Nasty Boys special. Yeah. It's hey, we're going to do some ugly shit for 20 minutes, and we're just going to hurt the shit out of each other, but we'll get beers afterwards. Cool?
Yeah. It just bumps on the concrete, weapon shots, tables. This is not the kind of match you were used to seeing in WCW or definitely not the WWF. I mean, Vince didn't do hardcore matches back then.
God, nobody did. Was the appeal of ECW was it was the only place you could see this stuff.
Cactus suplexes Sags onto a table, but it doesn't break. He covers him, and Knobs hits him with just a vicious shot with a shovel.
God, it's brutal.
Sags tries to pile drive Cactus through a table, but it just kind of gives out under their weight, and they just sort of fall off it.
And these are halfway to being Japanese tables. They're super thin and they're super skinny. I don't know why these are the tables that they had, but yeah, the idea that these two assholes were going to stand on that is ridiculous.
Yeah. Cactus gets thrown off the ramp onto the concrete floor. Nothing to break his fall. And it just happens in the background as the camera is focused on. Max Payne fighting the other guy. Like, isn't really even that remarked upon when it happens, but it's just a nasty, nasty bump.
It really is. This match is brutal.
Cactus gets knocked out with a shovel shot and pinned. I really enjoyed this. This was just not the kind of match you were used to seeing in American wrestling at this time.
This isn't my kind of match. It certainly was interesting. Cactus Jack had such an appealing way about him, and the Nasty Boys are so underrated.
Yeah.
Mostly Jerry Sags, Brian Knobbs sucks, but like as a team,
but yeah, it's something we talked about before that like I think when people think about them, like they think of them as sucking, and it's just like they had a really tough act to follow in the WWF, like coming in being the champions, like right as the tag team boom period was ending, when the Hart Foundation broke up and Demolition was done and the British Bulldogs were gone, and just like all the great teams of the 80s were gone, and they were left having to try to carry things. But yeah, I think they're massively underrated.
Before we get away from talking about this match, I want to take some time to deviate and talk about Max Payne, who is definitely the forgotten part of this and of wrestling history even. And I kind of did a deep crawl on his Wikipedia, and which he certainly wrote for himself, and you can tell. And I want to read you a line from his Wikipedia, and you tell me what you think of it, okay? In 1998, Peterson developed the character Max Payne, short for Maximum Pain, a sinister, grungy, Jimi Hendrix-loving heavy metal guitarist. His original idea was Lucifer Payne, but he felt that was too foreboding.
That was too satanic.
The character had a neo-noir look and feel. Well, as far as the live theater of professional wrestling would allow.
I don't think any of that's true.
I don't think it is either, man.
I can't tell you much about Max Payne. Just kind of a big guy. That's all.
Well, the important thing is that during this feud, he's going to get really pissed at the Nasty Boys for stiffing him, refuse to go down on a fall, and break Knobbs' shoulder. And they're going to fire him.
Yeah. So that's probably the most notable thing he ever did.
And then he went to WWE as Man Mountain Rock.
Oh, fuck. I forgot about that.
Yeah, baby. He was the one who played the guitar.
It's a Bruce Pritchard special if I've ever heard one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, these matches get better when they replace him with Kevin Sullivan.
It's impossible for them not to.
Backstage, Jesse Ventura interviews Johnny B. Bad, who issues a challenge to the winner of the Steve Austin versus Great Muta U.S. title match. And yes, that is the next match. It's Steve Austin defending the U.S. title against the Great Muta.
Like, this is one of the all-time on-paper world champion match of all time. Like, again, if you haven't been a regular listener of ours, you may not know, but I don't look at the cards for these shows before I watch them. Some of them I've seen, some of them I haven't, but I like being surprised. So when these two came out to wrestle this match, I was like, what?
Yeah, this is a pretty good one. Unfortunately, the match blows.
Yeah, this match sucks. They're both pretty much heels.
That's the biggest thing. Is it's just kind of like hard to portray Muta as a heel in the U.S. I mean, like, or as a face in the U.S. He does get some pops because the stuff he does is so spectacular, but like the character and presentation is so naturally heel for American wrestling fans at this point.
Oh, God, yeah. And he's come off of, like, he had, like, a 3-year run before this where he was, like, a top heel. And then he just gets jobbed out and leaves. Like, he doesn't ever turn or anything like that. And Austin is just a dickhead. So you're not going to cheer Austin. It's just one of those weird situations, like, the whole first half of the match, everyone's silent. It's good work, but, like, you need a heel and a face in WCW.
Yeah. So Muta works some holds. Austin gets control, and then he just sits on an abdominal stretch for like 5 minutes.
Yep.
Muta eventually gets out. He hits Austin with the stun gun, which is Austin's signature move. Muta then business picks up as he hits a super Frankensteiner, which the crowd goes wild for.
When I watched this, I was like, oh man, that's a pretty good move. It didn't really occur to me at the time that, like, this wasn't a thing. Like, this wasn't. A lot of people probably saw this move for the very first time right here.
Austin charges Muda, and he gets backdropped over the top rope, and that's a disqualification in WCW. So that's our finish.
Bill Watts is gone. Why is this still a fucking disqualification? Like, because this match was starting to get hot at the end, and I was starting to get into it.
Yeah, we're gonna get some heat.
Only for them to backdrop him over the top rope, and the match ends, and everyone's just fine with that. It's like, that's trash. That's the stupidest way a match has ever ended in the history of wrestling. Wait, hold on. A match ended with a miscarriage once. I take that back.
Muda hits a plancha out onto Austin and Rob Parker to get his heat back.
He's not really here for very long, is he?
Not that I remember. I think I don't know if this is a one-off, but yeah, he's not in for a long run this year, I don't believe.
No, I mean...
Wish we could have gotten him and Hogan.
And this is right when New Japan is like lighting on fire.
The and they're about to launch those WCW paychecks are just nothing compared to what he's getting in Japan.
And they're about to like launch into that like amazing in New Japan versus U5 feud that's like winds up being like one of the best business gate storylines in the history of professional wrestling. He doesn't need this. This is nothing.
Then Jesse Ventura interviews Dustin Rhodes, who promises to take care of Bunkhouse Buck tonight. Next up, we've got a match for the WCW International World Heavyweight Championship as Rick Rude defends against Sting.
Now, in your head when Steve just said that, you must have thought, oh man, that sounds like a pretty good match. But it's not, guys. Rick Rude in WCW was like haunted by a mysterious bad match ghost or something. I don't know what it is. Or like, let's even go further. Let's experiment with this hot take. Steve, is Rick Rude a good wrestler?
He had a lot of awful pay-per-view matches, is the thing. Like,
just some of the worst ever.
He's got this reputation as a workhorse. And I feel like it's because he got some good matches out of the Ultimate Warrior, which, like, okay, credit to him for that. Not everybody could do that, but, like, man, he had some stinkers. Like, the match against Ricky Steamboat from the first Royal Rumble, this one, the match against Chono from Halloween Havoc that we reviewed.
Maybe the worst match of all time. Like, it's not even a match. It's an 11-minute headlock.
And that was the problem, is he would just go so heavy on the rest holds. Just sit on headlocks and chin locks for minutes at a time.
But also, he just seemed to be off with everyone. Like, he just seemed to lack chemistry with anyone he was wrestling. Like, basically everyone who's ever wrestled Sting has had good chemistry with Sting. Sting's like a blank canvas to paint your match on. But Rick Rude does not have good chemistry with Sting at all. To the point where, like, they try, like, in this match, there's, like, a full minute where they try unsuccessfully to perform a normal backdrop, like, 4 different times. It's bad.
Okay, I should probably answer the question on everyone's mind, which is, what the hell is the WCW International World Heavyweight title?
Great question.
So, here's how this came about. WCW and the NWA split back in 1991 when Ric Flair left WCW. He was, at that point, the WCW title and the NWA title were the same thing. Physically one belt, but technically 2 separate championships. When Flair leaves WCW, of course, WCW immediately strips him of the title and crowns a new champion. But the NWA didn't strip him right away because they were hoping he would go defend the title in, like, what was left of the territories. Like, that he'd go to AWA and World Class may still have been going at that point, but he'd go to wherever. He obviously didn't do that and instead ended up signing with the WWF, which is when the NWA stripped him. The NWA at that point, like, ended their relationship with WCW. They instead had a tournament to crown a new champion in Japan, which was won by Masa Chono. I guess the NWA was over in Japan just because Japan takes a more sport-like approach to wrestling.
It had just always been. That goes all the way back to like Ricky Dozan facing like Lou Thez and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Like there had always been a deep connection between the NWA and like the upstart Japanese, like the JPW and all of that stuff. And like Inoki had always kept really close to that. Baba had always kept really close to that. Like they valued the tradition and the seriousness of that form of wrestling. Inoki flirted with WWF for a little while in the late 70s, early 80s, but it didn't click super well. So it's much more of a relationship between NWA and Japan, and it always will be. Like there's a deep respect to the point where like in the mid thousands, late thousands, they brought the NWA title back in Japan, not anywhere else. Like Bruce Tharp, who was a lawyer who bought the NWA, would take it to Japan and have Rob Conway defend it on New Japan pay-per-views. It's the only place it still existed.
So when Bill Watts takes over WCW, he makes a deal with the NWA to bring the NWA title back to WCW, but they keep the two titles separate. There's an NWA champion, there's a WCW champion. So long before the WWF had two world titles, WCW did.
And it was kind of handy to have around because it was mostly just for Sting to have. So like Ric Flair and Sting didn't have to constantly be interacting. It's just like, Sting will be going for one, and Flair will go for the other, and we can keep them apart.
Eric Bischoff takes over. He does not care about the NWA at all. And he's right not to, because the NWA brand does not have any value by 1993.
No. Is this the year that Shane Douglas throws it in the trash, or is that next year?
That is 94. That is this year. So Bischoff starts deliberately provoking the NWA by doing title changes without the board's approval. Yep. When he put the belt on Rick Rude, the NWA withdrew from WCW. So then they had to figure out, we still have this belt. What are we going to call it? At first, they just called it the Big Gold Belt.
They literally defended on pay-per-view as the Big Gold Belt.
Yeah. Then they just called it the World Championship, and then they settled on the WCW International Heavyweight Championship, which was the World Championship of the fictional entity WCW International.
Yep.
I kind of dig the idea of just pretending there's this other, oh yeah, WCW is all over the world. You just never see any of it because this is in America.
Well, the interesting thing about it, too, is that to actually further that point, Sting and Rick Rude have another match in Japan the month after this for this same belt. This is the belt they would defend when they did take trips to Japan. So that made sense at least.
I think that's where Rude breaks his back.
Yep, that's where Rick Rude breaks his back in the match. It's his last match ever. He wrestles 7 minutes with a broken back.
Oh my God, Rick Rude. Look, Rick Rude may not be necessarily the biggest fan of his ring work, but one of the toughest dudes ever.
What a tough motherfucker. Also, Rick Rude's the one who got Man Mountain Rock hired with WWF. So this is a Rick Rude podcast.
Harley Race comes to the ring to say that Vader is challenging the winner of the match. Sting jumps Rude before the bell, clotheslines him over the top. I don't know why that isn't a disqualification. Someone explain that to me.
This is what drove me so fucking crazy about this stupid promotion.
Yeah.
Maybe because under international rules, you know what? That would even make sense if they played it up that way, because that was the big thing with the Fujinami Flair match, right? Is that for Japan rules, it's totally fine to go over the top rope.
Yeah, but it's a disqualification in the NWA.
So maybe this belt is contested under Japanese rules.
Rude works on a chin lock, then a sleeper hold. Sting finally fights out. He hits the Stinger Splash and squashes the referee in the process. They go to the finish where Race accidentally hits Rude with a chair, but Race is out of position, and it takes a solid minute to get this set up.
It's brutal.
And then, Sting gets the pin and wins the title.
I can't even... There's no excuse for any Sting match in the 90s being bad. He's had such good matches with so much shittier people than Rick Rude.
And yet, this just doesn't click.
Like, it's not to the level of Steamboat, where, like, all of Steamboat's matches are good. It's just that none of Sting's matches are bad. Except this one. This match blows.
Shivani and Heenan speculate about whether or not Hogan will show up tonight. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention, Sting pinned Rude and won the title.
Oh, yeah.
This is pretty much the end of the road for this belt. When Hogan comes in, they unify this with the WCW title because Hogan's got to be the one true champion, and they're right to do it.
Yeah, it means so much more when it's just the one belt, and Hogan holds it for 50 years.
Yeah. Shivani and Heenan speculate about whether or not Hogan will show up tonight. Spoiler alert, he does not.
He ain't there.
Then we've got the bunkhouse match as Bunkhouse Buck takes on Dustin Rhodes. This match is mostly Dustin getting his ass kicked and just bleeding like a stuck pig.
Bunkhouse Buck is not good. He has a look that could best be described as gross. But that's what he's going for.
Yeah, he's a grimy old cowboy. Jimmy Golden, wasn't he Jack Swagger's dad?
Oh, I think he was.
Yeah, he was.
Holy shit, that's a deep cut. Nice pull.
That's about all I have to say about Bunkhouse Buck.
There's really nothing else to say.
I enjoyed this match. Good Southern-style bloody brawl. We had blood. We had belt whippings. Some babyface fire from Dustin. Lots of bionic elbows.
Dustin Rhodes, if you imagine a future where Hulk Hogan never comes, that future for certain involves Dustin Rhodes being the top star in this company 3 years from now. That's where this is all going.
He's probably 25 at this point.
Yeah. He is growing into the shoes his father left for him, and he's slowly starting to do it. But when Hogan comes in and that glass ceiling is put up, and it's put up irreplaceably, he decides that he just can't fucking do it, and he bails and goes to WWE instead, which you can't blame him for.
Yeah.
It's just, I will always feel that there was so much more room to grow for the natural character that Gold Dust stunted.
Yeah. Buck gets the win with a shot from Brass Knuckles. I get the sense this was more my style of match than yours.
It was. I don't really like these kind of slugfests, but that's okay. It was a perfectly fine match. I really like Dustin selling. It didn't make the end of this match doesn't make any sense because Parker sneaks the Brass Knuckles to Bunkhouse Buck,
who the hell cares?
Who hits Dustin and hides them.
Street
those
fight.
Are legal in this match.
There's no rules here. You can do whatever you want.
You can't just do traditional cheating tactics finishes in a match like this and have it make any fucking sense. Who booked all the finishes on this show?
Next, we've got Jesse Ventura backstage interviewing an irate Rick Rude. Him and Vader get into a fight and have to be separated.
Now, while Rick Rude has completely blown it as a professional wrestler on this show, this segment rules.
Yeah.
A bloody, beaten to shit Rude just screaming in defiance at Vader as Vader just tries to shove through half the locker room. There's a bunch of guys keeping him apart who are just in their tighty whities. It's great.
Next up, we've got the Boss against Vader. The Boss is the big boss man. Can't use that name in WCW, so he's the Boss instead, and everything about him is exactly the same as the big boss man.
This shouldn't be good. I know they're both very
boss
talented.
Match.
They're both very talented big guys. Two of the most agile and athletic big men who have ever wrestled. But even so, this probably shouldn't be great. This match fucking rules. It's the second best match on this show. It's awesome.
Boss Man debuted in WCW back in December. He beat Rick Rude in a non-title match on Saturday night, and then he challenged Rude for the title at Starrcade but lost. Um, then he was the referee for the Vader Flair match at Super Brawl. Harley Race handcuffed him to the cage so that he could interfere. He broke the handcuffs, took out Race, and then hit Vader with his nightstick, which allowed Flair to get him in the figure four and tap him out. So we've got this match. It's a wild brawl. They fight on the ramp and back into the ring. Heenan asks why they bother setting up a ring at all since nobody's using it tonight.
Fair point.
Vader backs up the ramp, runs, and then jumps over the rope for a splash, but Boss Man gets his knees up.
Vader is so fucking awesome.
Yeah. This is that ramp that like runs all the way up to the ring and connects to it. I love this ramp.
In my opinion, that's the only way wrestling ramp should work. I hate the WWE one where they just have like a ton of space around ringside. Like, I get that that's better for like dives and stuff, but this just looks so much better. And like that visual of
such cool stuff with it.
The visual of just like running down the ramp and jumping over the top rope into the ring is awesome.
Yeah,
and then there's what
thrown out onto the ramp.
And then there's what Misawa and Kobashi did was hey, let's do a tiger suplex off the ramp and almost die.
They go back to the floor. Vader gets thrown into the crowd. Back in the ring, Boss slams Vader. We now see Vader has just a horrible gash over his eye.
Brutal. Like, to the point where it almost looks like...
What was it about Vader that would allow him to get these horrible cuts over his eyes?
I think it's because he threw such stiff shots that people were punching him in the fucking face.
Yeah. Vader takes over. He sets up for the Vader bomb, but gets thrown off the ropes. Bossman sort of suplexes Vader off the middle ropes, but doesn't really get him up, so it's more of a DDT.
Yeah, he falls, and then Vader kind of like, oh, and then he suplexes himself.
Boss hits a big cross body from the top rope. Bossman comes off the top again, but this time Vader catches him out of the air with a power slam. Incredible strength to catch and rotate somebody that big.
Just stunning.
Vader hits the Vader bomb, but that only gets two. Vader goes all the way up to the top rope, and he hits the moonsault. I cannot imagine taking a moonsault from Vader.
Like, and he does it like Bam Bam Bigelow style, where he gets like 3/4 of the way over. And like he's still... The fascinating thing about it is that he lands it perfectly.
Yeah.
Perfectly, to the point where he's even like bracing his hands on the ground so he doesn't even do as much damage. This is a work of wrestling art. People don't give Vader enough credit, arguably because he's such a dickhead, which is fair.
Which he was. That's true.
He for sure was. He'd be the first to admit it. But man, this is just an exhibition of how awesome Vader can be, and they're building him up for Hogan at this point. That's the idea. Man, it rules. But, like, I don't want to take anything away from the Boss Man either, because this is maybe the best I've seen Boss Man be since the 80s.
Yeah, this was a great, great match. And they had another one. I think they wrestled at Bash at the Beach this year. I remember doing that, and same thing. Just an awesome match.
Love it.
Great chemistry. Boss recovers, and he hits both Vader and Race with the nightstick. WCW Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel shows up and puts a stop to that nonsense. And then we get a rather hilarious segment backstage where Bockwinkel tells Bossman he's taking away his nightstick and handcuffs and that he's no longer the boss.
He takes his name. He strips his identity. Like, you can't just do that as the commissioner.
Apparently you can. So the real story here is the WWF was threatening to sue them because they had so flagrantly ripped off the Big Boss Man character.
Makes sense.
So he would go on to instead be the Guardian Angel.
That's so much worse.
I don't know. And then he was Big Bubba again, and then he became Ray Traylor, and then he went back to the WWF.
Yeah, he ran out of shit to do real quick.
Next up, it's main event time for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. Ric Flair defends against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. 5 years ago in Chicago, Steamboat beat Flair to win the world title. Will history repeat itself tonight? Flair is 45 here. Steamboat is 41. Um, Steamboat comes out first. He does the fire-breathing entrance. What do you think of this? I think this is pretty cool.
I think it's cool. My problem was it was such a transparent attempt to like add some personality to him.
Yeah.
And it does, but it makes him seem more like a mid-card act than a main eventer, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of like, hey, it's he kind of becomes like Coco Beware, which is not really good for someone of his incredible talents. I get why they did it. It's just it always seemed a little gimmicky and silly to me.
Yeah. I'm sure Vince was annoyed that they spent all the time like teaching him how to do that. And then he fucked off and did it in WCW.
Oh, I'm sure he was annoyed at that. Like, there's no question.
Flair is out second. He's, cut his hair, but still looks pretty damn good here.
When he takes the robe off and he's looking around, like, he looks at least 5 years younger than I expected him to.
Yeah.
Like, he's looking great.
He looks amazing.
Like, when he'll eventually get in the ring with Hogan, he'll look better than Hogan.
Yeah, because Hogan had shrunk so much.
Yeah.
Michael Buffer makes the introductions in the ring. I love how he rattles off, like, the athletic commission, the timekeeper, the doctor at ringside, the referee. Do you think he just made these names up, or are these real people?
I hope he made them up, because that would be genius.
It's like, is there an Illinois? Does the Illinois State Athletic Commission still exist in 1994? Are they still regulating pro wrestling? Who cares? It sounds awesome.
But my other favorite part was like a former television champion, which also Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is as well. A former world champion, Steamboat is as well. Like just going through like how equal these two are.
And this is such a different style of ring announcing from like WWE, where it's the exact same announcement every time. Like never any flourishes. It's just this guy, this weight. I don't even know what do they do. Do they still do weights? I can't even remember now.
No, they don't. They don't even do hometowns anymore. They'll just do their names.
Yeah, the challenger, so-and-so. Yeah, I love the flourishes and how it's different each time and the way he builds this matchup as special. That, like, these guys fought 5 years ago in this town and Steamboat won the world title. Flair is fighting to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. Like, he tells the story of this match to you.
And the beautiful thing about that is, like, this is a time before hype videos, right?
Yeah.
So if you're at the live event, it's entirely possible that you came to this live event, you haven't been watching the fucking TV, you don't know what the actual like promos they've been cutting on each other are. That doesn't matter. Michael Buffer tells you the story before the match starts. Everything you need to know about this match, he tells you before the bell rings. It's perfect.
Shivani points out that Steamboat has always been a fan favorite, but he did get some boos during his entrance. Flair also received a mix of cheers and boos. It's a split crowd.
Yep.
Lots of holds and takedowns early in the match. Steamboat slaps Flair to signify that things are getting serious. He hits a press slam, some head scissors, and a drop kick that sends Flair to the floor. Steamboat throws Flair back in the ring, hits a flying chop to the head. He then works on a headlock for a while. Flair takes over. He goes through the usual Flair spots. And then he hits a crossbody that sends them both over the top rope to the floor. Why isn't that a disqualification?
Well, because it was just his momentum taking them over, Steve. It wasn't an intentional move, you see.
Damn it. Flair tries for a pile driver on the floor. Steamboat backdrops out of that. Steamboat hits a superplex. Flair bails out to the floor. Steamboat hits a springboard chop all the way down to the floor. Like, this is not the usual match. Like, they are going balls out here.
This is very cool. Like, and I don't know if it's just because when you watch a Flair versus Steamboat match, you're expecting an hour. So
yeah, here they've only got like 25 or 30 minutes.
And actually, this is a weird comparison to make, but you remember when Samoa Joe and CM Punk were having their awesome matches? And they did 2 hour-long matches in a row, 2-hour draws. And it was actually this match that they drew inspiration from. It's like, let's do it like that, where we'll do for 2 1-hour matches, they'll be expecting an hour, and instead we'll give them like nonstop action for 30 minutes instead. And they won't know what to make of it.
Well, that was what they did with the third leg of their series was they did the near 60-minute match in the Superdome, and then the
Yeah,
last one um, in Nashville, Flair beat him in like 30 minutes when they had the judges there to make the decision if it went 60 minutes to set up that, oh, this is going to go 60. Same thing, and probably inspired by that match, AEW having judges for the Jericho Cody match where we all
absolutely.
assumed it was going to go 60 minutes and instead MJF screwed him.
Yep.
Yeah, having judges is such a little thing, but I love that as a wrinkle.
It's amazing. I love the idea of doing that with just like big time matches just to make sure that nobody
Yeah,
gets screwed or anything like that.
yeah, guarantee we will have a winner.
I love that so much.
Yeah. Um, uh, Back in the ring, Flair goes for a knee drop, but Steamboat blocks it and rolls Flair into the figure four. That was a great spot.
What an awesome spot.
That's the kind of shit you don't see till like Kurt Angle's doing it 10 years after this.
Well, that's the funny thing too, is that like when Kurt and Chris start doing this later on, and then like Kurt just kind of makes it his deal, like that becomes hugely influential, and basically everyone on the indie scene starts working that way. Everyone reveres Steamboat Flair, but nobody tries to work this style during this era. I don't know if it's just because they're like, no, we can't touch that.
Is
No
anybody
point.
capable of this? Even though these guys are into their 40s, these are the two best athletes in the world.
But like nobody's even trying to wrestle the style at all. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's this isn't this doesn't wind up being super influential, except for the fact that anytime anybody does decide to try for a 5-star match, they're trying to perform this match. So it winds up like influencing like Kurt later on down the road. But it's just weird that it takes like 10 years to see another kind of match like this. It's weird.
Flair finally gets out. He tries for a suplex, but Steamboat rolls through into a cradle. That gets two. They struggle over a backslide. Steamboat wins it, gets another 2 count. Steamboat goes to the top rope, hits the flying crossbody. Flair kicks out again. Flair catches Steamboat with a clothesline. He goes to the top, but Steamboat throws him off. Steamboat goes for a superfly splash, but Flair rolls out of the way. Flair tries for the figure four. Steamboat initially blocks it, but Flair manages to cinch it in. Steamboat fights and manages to turn it over. He slips out. Steamboat hits a superplex and both guys are down. They are standing in Chicago at this point.
The last 3 minutes you just described
Oh, this was
are
electric.
electric. Yes.
The thing is, any Steamboat like roll up, backslide, these are all credible finishers in WCW. Like Steamboat beat Flair for the title with a small package. Like we've seen Flair get beat with small packages over and over in his career. Like people buy that those are the finish when they happen.
Oh yeah, Steamboat doesn't really have a finisher. He's never really had a finisher. Like he just beats you with small packages and leverage pins and stuff like that. That's what he does. And the genius of that is it means that anything can turn
Yeah.
into the finish. And so everything's a near fall. It's great.
Steamboat gets an Oklahoma roll. This would have been a 3 count, but the referee slipped and wasn't able to start the count when he should have.
That's not great.
Steamboat gets Flair in the double chicken wing. He falls back into a pin, and that gets the 1, 2, 3. It appears Ricky Steamboat has won the World Heavyweight Championship.
I didn't remember which one of their matches this was. I didn't think Ricky Steamboat won the title again. But when they do this and it's a clean 1, 2, 3, because he kind of turns it into like a tiger suplex almost, I was like, oh shit. The crowd goes nuts. Steamboat jumps up and celebrates. I'm like, fuck, I guess Steamboat wins the belt here. That's incredible. Nope, but he doesn't though.
Yeah. So upon replay, we see that Steamboat's shoulders are also down. Nick Patrick explains both men's shoulders are down on the pin, and then Nick Bockwinkel goes to the commentary booth to explain that because it was a draw, Flair retains the title. He has kind of a weird explanation for it, actually. It's not as straightforward as it seems like it could be.
I don't know if they're just trying to make Nick Bockwinkel like a super heel in one night. But basically every finish in this show is Nick Bockwinkel screwing over baby faces.
Yeah. So they would go on to have another match on Saturday night a few weeks after this, where Flair would settle things by getting the pin and, you know, reestablishing himself as the undisputed heavyweight champion. But show goes off the air with controversy here. Flair, I mean, I guess they wanted to do a big rating with the Flair Steamboat match. I don't really remember if they succeeded. I think they did, actually. So, yes, call it good for that. I might have tried to get another match out of this and seen if we could have gotten it for the May pay-per-view. I don't remember what the main event was there.
I mean, since they're just treading water until Hulk Hogan changes everything, I mean, why not? I mean, you don't have anything else really going on.
Yeah. And that's a wrap for Spring Stampede 1994. I enjoyed this. I thought this was one of the better WCW pay-per-views of this time period, but maybe the competition there isn't that stiff.
On paper, this show is out of control awesome. It doesn't live up to that. It's not terrible, aside from Sting and Rick Rude, which is an abomination that needs to be buried in the desert and left to die. But everything else on the show is pretty good. And fuck me, what I take away from this show is that Vader and Johnny B. Bad could have been megastars. They aren't allowed to be. They will both go to WWE and rot in gimmick prison. That sucks. But and also that Max Payne's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. Enjoyed the mix of, we get a great technical match in the main event. We got a couple hardcore matches. We got a big man rumble between Vader and Boss Man. Man, if Austin and Muta and Rude and Sting had kind of lived up to their potential, this would have been a great one.
Oh yeah, and if whoever was booking finishes hadn't just actively sabotaged every single fucking match, then that would have made a big impact too.
Yeah. So yeah, a wrap for Spring Stampede 1994. Next time on the Lawcast, we're going to have some fun as we go to revisit Backlash 2003 to take a look at Goldberg's debut in WWE and his match against The Rock.
It was a long time coming. It was many people's dream to see Goldberg enter the world of WWE and face The Rock and Austin and Triple H and all of the big stars. All of the dream matches from that era primarily revolved around Goldberg, and we finally got our shot to see it. And boy, did they blow it.
Yeah, ends up being a total disaster and like a kind of career tarnishing stain for Goldberg that, as we've talked about, he only really overcame with this, kind of second run he's had in the last few years in WWE.
And there's a lot of other really weird and wacky stuff too. Like, this is such a weird era. Like, they're sort of like just branching off into like a new almost generation, but they have such growing pains during this time. This is a really weird show.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of other fun shenanigans to look forward to from the Ruthless Aggression era on this one. It's John Cena's first big pay-per-view match as he gets a shot at Brock Lesnar. Kevin Nash's return and feud with Triple H, and all the other bizarre things we would get from the WWE in this era. So as always, thanks for listening. We look forward to seeing you again next time.